Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the third meeting of the Poznan Salesforce Marketer Group this year, and today we will do a deep dive on SSJS Library, an open source code base to help you speed up your development with Marketing Cloud. My name is Zuzana. I am a Salesforce Marketing Cloud architect at Deloitte Digital. I am also a Salesforce MVP and the leader of the Poznan Salesforce Marketer Group. And my guest today is Sascha Huwald, the creator of SSJS Library. Sascha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, thanks all for joining. My name is Sascha Huwald. I'm a director of technology for OSF Digital, but I'm also the co-founder of Email 360, which is a SaaS company, and the co-founder or the founder and creator of the SSJS Library, which I will go over today into more detail to showcase you what we can do with this.
Thank you, Sascha, and thank you for being here today with us. So before we jump into the presentation, I want to offer you all a chance to win a Salesforce certification voucher. We have multiple vouchers to give away today, and all you need to do is follow this link and sign up using the form. I will also post the link for you in the chat later. There will be a lottery at the end, so make sure to stay until the end of the event to find out how to claim your voucher if you are one of the lucky winners. A little bit of housekeeping. This session will be recorded, and the recording will be posted to the events page on the Trailblazer Community Group's website. At the end of the session, there will be a chance to ask Sascha questions about the library. So please post your questions in the chat or ask them directly during the Q&A. Last but not least, remember to sign up for the upcoming meetings organized by the Poznan Salesforce Marketer Group in the coming months. In June, we are planning a session about Activation Studio and Direct Messenger for Marketing Cloud. And most likely in September, we will host an in-person meeting, details to follow. So now let's jump to the main topic of today's meeting. So off to you, Sascha.
Thank you. You want to keep up the deep link, the bit.ly link up for a couple of more minutes while I do some introduction to the library itself, so you don't, people who can join still see the link?
Yes, let me just go back to that slide with the link, or I can just post it in the chat.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, post in the chat as well, and let's take over the screen here in a second. So again, thanks everyone for coming. Just a quick one. The talk will be around 40 minutes around the library. I have around planned 10 minutes around the Q&A, but we see how we go. If there's multiple questions popping up in the chat during the meeting, I will probably shorten the talk a bit and go directly into the question. And last but not least, in the last 5 to 10 minutes, we do then the lottery of the vouchers. So when it comes to the SSJS library, I will share my screen now, so can go from there. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So when it comes to the SSJS library, the first question to your mind is probably, what is it? So the SSJS library is an open source project started by me and driven by me, which is a code collections, which allows you to easily use and reuse the code within your projects. So if you're working with Marketing Cloud and with SSJS or any language in that matter, you will find that most of the time you repeat yourself. So you're writing a code for one project and then taking this code for another project. But you most of the time researching the code again, because sometimes there's a month, 2 months between these projects, and you have forgotten some of these codes you have already written. Then you also go sometimes into like Salesforce forums and trying to find some code snippets for yourself. And you sometimes copy them and find, oh, they're not really working for your use case, or there's some bug in there, or you're copying a JavaScript example and it doesn't work in SSJS. So you continuously reinventing and continuously store your code somewhere in a project and then have to redo it again and again and again. And then also the documentation of SSJS is not really the best in the Salesforce environment. And you kind of find yourself try and error a lot. This is at least what happened to me when I started 5 years ago with Salesforce. And I found myself that this is not a good way to code any SSJS in Marketing Cloud. And it's such a powerful language. So for me, it was, hey, I need something which I can reuse over and over again, but don't have to reinvent it all the time. So the dry approach for do not repeat yourself was not really given for me at the time. So I seen the need of this library. So this is what the library is. It's a collection of code snippets in a usable format, easy to inject into any of your projects and reuse it. So where can you find it? So the SSJS library is hosted on a GitHub account, which is publicly available. It's an open source project. And we will share the link to this after the meeting as well. But you can see it up in the address bar. It's basically email 360 SSJS Lib. And you can find the entire code open source in here. So you can use the library in 2 different ways. One, you can just simply go into this core folder and go through each individual code snippet and search for what you need and copy it into your project. That's one option. The preferred option is to actually install it on your system, so you don't have to go back and find code snippet you want to use. Because sometimes these code snippets are really connected to each other. And then if you pull one code snippet out, you're kind of in the same boat as before, where they're not really useful because they're missing some other parts of the library. So when you want to install it onto your system, it's a very simple way. All you need to do is, if you are on the main page of the GitHub, you can scroll down and you find a quick start part, which explains to you that you need to create a cloud page. And on the cloud page, which is a landing page, you just copy this code snippet. And this code snippet then will start an installation wizard for you, which guides you through each individual step of the installation process. There's some questions. You can add information into it, like white labeling, API access, but you don't have to. You can do that all on a later stage as well. I will not showcase today how you install it and how the wizard looks like, because I've done a video around this down here, which is on the YouTube channel of Email 360, which you can easily click and find then how to install it as well in a deep dive there. When it comes to what is being installed, it's always critical to know what is actually installed on my instance. It's all code snippets. It's nothing more than just a bundle of SSJS code, which is readily available across the entire Salesforce ecosystem, but combined into a usable format into this library. And I will show you this on the live system in a second. Just need to try to move this one over. Okay. I will show you this in a second, but in a nutshell, it's 2 parts. It's data extensions and content builder, content blocks, which are code snippets. And I will go through this in the system in a second. After you've installed it, there's an example as well here, how you're actually executing it into your code. But you also probably want to know, well, what is available? So we have also a documentation page, which by all means is not the greatest, and I need to find time to actually make it a useful documentation in a better UI version, but at least gives you a lot of overviews of what is possible. For example, which I will go today, is copy data extension. And you find the exact way of copying data extension in here with the library. So when I go now to the instance itself and I go to Content Builder, you will find that there's something installed called Email 360 as a folder with SSJS Lib, the Lib version, and 2 subfolders, Cloud Page and the Lib itself. Under the version, you find the main code snippet, which loads the actual library into your project, which then loads all individual library items itself. So under library itself, you find then all classes which has been created with, for example, Cloud Page, WS Proxy, Core, Logger, and so on and so forth. They're all, if you open up one, are just code all put together. The beauty of this is if you introduce this into your project, nothing has been executed because they are all simply just functions which you can execute as you need. So it doesn't slow down your project. It doesn't add a lot of loading time to your cloud page or to your script activity. Then you have two other folders, which is cloud page, which has error and login, which is used for a quick start login and error page, which the library is using as well if you want to choose so. The second part are the data extension. Same process, you have email 360, SSJS Library, and then you have the version number. A demo folder as well for the purpose of this demo today. It's normally not there. And this data extension has a few functions. The first one is the auth users. So if you choose to use the default authentication for logging into cloud pages, this is where the credentials being stored. The logger is for logging events. The API token is for Salesforce Marketing Cloud API tokens, because if you're working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud and the API, the REST API, they say you have to store the token for 20 minutes and you should not recreate the token unless it's about to expire. And this is what this data extension is for. And then an internal data extension to store columns for WS Proxy, which I will not go into today, but it's for the internal purposes. So when it comes to my setup, I just want to quickly show you how my setup is for the demo today, so you can follow there as well. So I have a simple SSJS file on my local storage, which I upload to Dropbox. And I have a cloud page which reads the actual Dropbox file and then render it on the cloud page. So if I store this, like save this, you will see on the right-hand top side of my little Dropbox here that there's a little icon popping up saying it's saving. And now the cloud page, my code has been saved. And if I go back to the actual cloud page, which is this one, and I just refresh this cloud page, you will see that it's coming out now, hello world. So this gives me now a simple environment to showcase you what the library is doing. However, you can also do this in a script activity, edit to an automation, or otherwise in SMS messages, in emails if you want to. So when it comes to the library, and first thing we know when you're writing SSJS, it is mandatory for anyone writing SSJS to debug what you're doing and getting some idea what's happening. The default way I've seen many, many times is just using write. So write hello world, this is the debug. But the problem with this is you kind of always output it in the browser on the top here. And if you're working with objects or arrays or a large set of data coming back and you want to debug that, it's really hard to debug because you can't really read it. You're probably copying it out somewhere else and you're spending a lot of time to try to debug this. How we do it normally in JavaScript development, you use console.log, for example. So let's use this. The library itself has something which I put in, it's a console.log. By default, it doesn't exist. So if I write console.log and just write out the same thing, let's do that up quickly here, I will actually get an error. Because console.log is not an accepted, and it's not a method of this object. And you see that it's actually printing this out instead of giving us a 500. And that's the reason why we're doing a try and catch block here to actually fetch any error and then writing it out here. And I believe the reason why console.log is not part of SSJS, which is normal from JavaScript, is because it's designed to run on the server, not in your browser. So you technically do not need to log something into the console because there's no way to access this console because it's not running on the console. However, for debugging purposes, this is quite useful. So how do we make it actually work? Well, the first thing we need to do is, as I said, we need to load our library. And the way how we load the library is, as I explained it into the on the page of the GitHub, you use content block by key and load the overall content block from this library. So if you go back to the conf block, you can see it's exactly under the versioning. You can see the exact name of the customer key. So with this, we should be able to use console log, but that's also not working. And the reason why it's not working is because we need to initialize console first. Console is existing, but we can't just simply override it the way how we normally could. So in order to make this work, we can use something like var console equal new console. And if we use this now, we go back to our cloud page and open it up, we actually now get the output down on the bottom here. Hello world, this is debug. Which is great because now we can also use then warn instead of log and do the same thing. And now we get a warning down here. Or we can do an error. And now we out of sudden have enabled this. So we don't have to understand how this all works in the backend. How do I write console log? What is the actual semantic for this? It just worked because you just created the library and initialized the library and the console log. That is one thing where this is happening, but this is basically from the core part. So remember, if I go back to our GitHub, we have something like core, WS proxy, polyfills, and so on and so forth. So I'm going through the core right now. So part of the core is the console. But another thing from the core is actually something else we're using quite often, is calling HTTP endpoints. And if you work with mscript as well as SSJS, calling endpoints like a post or a get sometimes gets you funny responses, and you not really can use them. So the way how the library is using this is there's a function called HTTP request, which utilizes a HTTP request method in the SSJS functions from Salesforce itself. However, it's easier to use than using it directly from SSJS because it's more structured. So what we're doing here is we're creating a new variable called rec, giving it an object. Sorry, can you? I'll just mute. Thanks. Creating a method of post. And with this HTTP request, we can actually do more than post and get. We can do update, we can patch, we can delete, depending on where you want to send your request to. But for this purpose, we just use post. A URL, an application format, and the actual payload. And then we put all the things together with HTTP request method, URL, content type, and payload. As you can see, I don't have any URL. So let's quickly fix this. Here's a nice website which allows you to just create a quick dummy post endpoint. And you can go in and simply add this here. And if I execute this now, what will happen is I will get a response code back saying, well, there's a status 200 coming back from that server with some content. But if I refresh this page now, I actually see that it actually received my request. So with the library now, I can very simply do post, patch, delete, update calls from the core. This is the core part. There's many other function core which you can use, but these are two really the ones I use often. However, when it comes to actually developing, you kind of, when you're debugging and you want to run console doesn't really do a lot for you. Yes, you can just write a certain console statement there, but it's more for debugging purposes. If you have used development and worked with development environment and read news in the last year where there's something log4j, which is the Apache version of a logger, which went through the news as a big issue there of having a vulnerability. But there's another version called log4j, which is a JavaScript version for this logger. And I've created something called the logger for Marketing Cloud SSJS as well. So if you're not familiar how the logger works in general, which is not part of Marketing Cloud, but the idea behind the logger is you have different logging levels. So you have a logging level saying info or trace, and then you have different levels going up from top to bottom. So all the way to error and fatal. And then you have the ability to control in your project what you want to actually log. So you can say, I want to log this message as a trace, and I want to log this message as an error. And then you can control what should happen with this message when it's been triggered. And that's where the logger is really powerful. And I'll show you this very quickly. So in order to do this, we need to do a new instance. And let's say we say log new logger, and we give the logger a name. What we also can do is we can just use now a log level. So log.level, and we can say, and this is nothing new. So if you have worked with a logger, it's exactly the same way, or similar way, because again, the original one is from Apache. The JavaScript version is a bit different as well, because we don't have a lot of access, but the logic behind is exactly the same. So we can say the log level is debug. So now everything should be displayed, which is level debug or above. So if I say log debug, this is a message, and execute this, what I will get is now I have a timestamp, which it's my timestamp now. So if wherever you're in the world is different, with the type, which is a debug, and the actual name of the logger, which is a demo, and the actual message of the logger event. If I, however, do the same thing with a trace, which is the lowest level, so saying trace, this is a trace message, it will not show up. And the reason why it will not show up is because trace is below the level you want to debug, or the logger should use. I can change it to trace, and now it will show me both messages, because now we have demo and trace. So you have a trace, and you have the debug message here. And so you can define the hierarchy you want to do. So if I'm just copying, for example, all these, you will see that now we have trace. We should see debug, trace, info, and error. So all of those should now show up in my console. So if I refresh, I see all of them now. You see it should be seen in the console, another one, and then there's an info and an error. That's all well and good, but what does it, is it different to console? Like I can do the same with console. That's right, but the difference, oh, sorry, I've done it. The difference with this is very simple, because you're using console log, you can't control which method should be shown where. And this is where the logger comes in very handy. You have something called appender. And appender is basically the layer which defines where this log message should be sent to. Should it send to the console, to the HTML? Should it send to a data extension? Or maybe an HTTP endpoint? So with the logger, you can do this. And the way how you do this, and I will share this code afterwards, so don't worry if you don't get all the code right now. I'm just putting it all in here. So the way how you do it is you can configure the logger itself, and you can use appenders to actually identify each individual appender. So you can say that the data extension should just get a level of info. The type of console should get a trace. The type of HTML should get the debug. And then you have the type HTTP should get error. So what that means is every message which is level error or above, which is error or fatal, will go into this HTTP, which gives you an endpoint, again, which we have seen before. Every error, message which is debug or above goes into HTML. Everything which is trace or above goes to console, and everything which is above info goes into data extension. So if you're looking at in the right order, you will see it's trace, debug, info, error. There's another one which is warn, and there's a bit more you can do, but this is for now. So the only thing we need to do now is adding a URL here. So if I'm going back to my post bin, and go back and create a new one, and I copy my post bin here, going in here, and now if I refresh the cloud page, what you will see is the real power of this logger. So you can see the following. Debug, remember we said that the HTML should get debugged. So the trace method you should not see, which is down here. This trace should only be seen in the console. Right? So if I go back, it says debug. This should be seen in the console and HTML. Well, this should be seen in the console and HTML. Then you have another message which goes in to say info. Well, that should be seen in HTML, DE, and the console. And I will go into the data extension in a second to show you this. So if I'm going to the logger data extension, you'll find two records in here, which is HTML, DE, and console, and this should be in all. So if I go back to the page, you can see it further. The error message should be everywhere. Why? Because the error is pretty much the highest one, second highest one after fatal, and because the other ones were debug, trace, or info, they're all showing up here as well. And you can see that the console has trace. So this is a trace, it should be in the console. You can see that. The same as the debug, the info, the error, and the trace. So now we have three different areas where this message has been being delivered to, into the HTML, into the console, into a data extension, or into this post endpoint, which right now we only got one because we defined only error should go in here. So now you have a very powerful tool to actually handle and manage your errors in your script and send it in a live production environment to endpoints where you monitor it and can control it, what should happen, either way in data extensions or in external sources, which allows you really to be powerful on your project. Because if something goes wrong in your project, you most of the time will not really know it until something critical breaks. But if something minor breaks and it just adds up over time to then create a critical problem, you can find these errors easily by using these logger functions. So this is part of the logger. The other one I want to show you is very simple. It's something called polyfills. If you never work with JavaScript, that's not a problem, but polyfills in general are ways of introducing new parts of JavaScript into an old environment. SSJS itself uses a very old JavaScript environment, and most of the time, some of the basic functions like trim are not existing. So without the library, if you want to trim white spaces in front of the string, it's going to be a problem because you can't use trim. So what I see a lot of times is I see a code where a lot of polyfills being popped on top to enable certain functions. And then your code becomes very big and long, and then you can't really use it to debug anymore because you have to read through so many pieces of code first to find out where actually something's happened. And it's because most of the time it's one big file, it's become really cumbersome to work with and prone to error as well. But I've seen this because it's the only way you can do it. Is you don't have really a trim function. And if you don't have the real trim function, you come up with your own kind of trim function. And then you can just delete the spaces in front and back from the string. So the library has a lot of polyfills. Too many to go over them, but I've spent a lot of time to get a lot of polyfills into the library, and trim is one of them. So if you look at it, I'll just use the logger again to just go the level of debug and not putting anything out below level debug. And I'll just go through creating a variable called greetings, which has hello world with white spaces. Then I log the debug message with greetings, and I'm expecting this output. Then I do greetings.trim, which is the normal JavaScript function of trim. And if you Google it and you find it from Microsoft, how to use it, it's exactly the demo of the Microsoft environment. And then you would basically trim all white spaces, leading and trailing white spaces. I'll just comment this part out, just so it doesn't get confused. But if I'm refreshing this now, you will see now that you don't have any white spaces anymore on your string. That's one polyfill. The other polyfill is starts with. I use it a lot when I need to know if some string starts with a certain phrase at a given position because of naming conventions or naming patterns a customer or a client has defined. Then it becomes an interesting part to always look for a certain part in a string. Again, starts with, coming directly from the NDN from Microsoft. It's a sample string, to be or not to be, that's the question. And then starts with, again, from a polyfill, you have, if you can hover over it, you see the search string, the position number, and it returns a Boolean. So true or false, if it starts with it or not. So to be says true because it starts with to be. Not to be should be false because it does not start with not to be. It should be true here when not to be is because we specifically say it should start at position 10. So it starts right there. And then, yes, that should be true. So if I refresh this, you will see that it's now true, false, and true. True, false, and true. So this is one big part of the library, are polyfills, because you have to use some of those eventually in your projects. And trim is probably one of the most common one because you need to trim white spaces of strings, especially from inputs or form fields. You want to trim this. You can trim this obviously on client side, but you end up using trim on server side as well. And this allows you that by simply just initializing the platform, the library, and it's doing it for you. The other one I want to show you is the API part. So if you're looking at working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud API, as I explained to you, it's really, really important to store your token you generate in a data extension for 20 minutes and reuse this token rather than recreating a token all the time. For example, if you run an automation every 5 minutes, like with a hack of minute wait or something like this, or if you have a cloud page which has a lot of engagement and you need to use the API to trigger something, you should not recreate the token every time you do this. Or in an email, for example, if you use an API, which is not recommended to use in Salesforce Marketing Cloud API because just of processing speed in general, but you should not recreate a token if your old token is still usable. And the reason for that is just because of waste management on Salesforce side, and they can be coming throttling. In the worst case, they basically stop enabling you the API in general. So the guideline is to store it. So if you're working with tokens, most of the time you find yourself going to a code example, grabbing the code example, and going into your project, and then you have this big blob of get token, refresh token, store token, and then you have to, like, it's pretty much like 30, 40 lines of code just to generate a token. And then you have to start using this token in your project. With the SSJS library, it does it all automatically for you. So all you need to do is you create the REST new Salesforce Marketing Cloud API. And I just want to show you quickly something from this before I go into generating the token. If I do log debug REST, it will actually give me all the functions Salesforce Marketing Cloud API has to offer. So if I refresh this page now here, you will see that there's delete assets, email preview data extension role, is token expired, resume journey, pause journey, retrieve assets properties, retrieve script activity folder IDs, trigger script activities. So there's a lot of functions you can use from the Salesforce Marketing Cloud API straight out of the box. And I'll extend this over and over again over time. So when it comes to the generating the token, all you need to do is you initialize your REST with Salesforce Marketing Cloud API. You can use whatever name you want up from here. I'm used to use REST. And you initialize the class Salesforce Marketing Cloud API. And then you do rest.getToken. And if you refresh the page now, you actually get a token back, which is great because now you have a token which has been generated. But what happened with this token? This token actually lives in here with the client ID, which is SSJS Lib, and then you have an expiry date with how long it will last. So for me, that's exactly 20 or like 18 minutes or something. But this is not a calculated field. That's actually what the token gives you back. So this token is a JWT token. You can just go to any base64 decoding and decoding this and see exactly what's in the token. But that's stored in here for reuse. So you can see, let's say, start ending with 4DBT. If I refresh this, it will still end up with 4DBT because it's now reusing this token over and over again. And if you use it in multiple places in your script, it will actually not load it from the data extension, but from your cache of your project as well. So it's not slow, it's very fast, and it's exactly what Salesforce wants you to do. With the library itself, it's just simply just calling one line of code and it's done. So what can we do with the Salesforce Marketing Cloud API? Well, how about we trigger a journey? So let's say you have a cloud page and you want to, after successfully responding on your processing page, you want to trigger a journey at the end. So what I've done is I've created a journey. I'll just run one test in here. And I have an API key event. And if I'm not mistaken, you should be able to enter anytime. And associated with an entry event, you have also a data extension. And if you look at the demo, you see my demo journey, which has one record count, which has an email and date UTC, which is basically exactly the data I want to put in here to trigger the journey. So if I would change this now to Sascha 2 or 3, doesn't matter, and I fire this off, it will trigger a journey event based on the data email I sent to, which is the identifier, then the API event of the journey, and the data itself I want to send into it. So the way how that works is I don't even need to create a token here anymore because it's all done by trigger journey event. So all you need to do is you create the Salesforce Marketing Cloud API instance, and then you call trigger journey event. And then I will output just the response inside the console. But I also want to see what happened on the data extension. Another thing what happened is I use something like get date UTC. This again is something part of the core of the library, which you easily can get a UTC date. You don't have to worry about how to create a UTC date, adding +6 hours and then reformatting it that it can work for any data extension imports of a date field, all done for you as get UTC. So if I refresh now this page, what you will see, it actually comes back with true. Well, that's not really telling, right? But in the end, that's what it is. It's triggering the journey. You trigger true. So if I go now to the data extension and refresh the data extension, you will see that Sascha 2 has entered the journey at a certain date. And if you go back to the journey builder itself, and let's just do a health check on Sascha 2. Yeah, maybe it's timed out. I just have to refresh it then. Refresh this, and then you will see that there's a second entry into the journey. There was one, and now it's a second, and now went to the bottom part. So very simple to trigger just a journey. You don't have to have the headache of, okay, how do I build this up? How do I get the token? How do I trigger the journey? What is the endpoint called? And so on and so forth. It takes all the hassle out of this. It's basically just this very simple line of code there. There's one more thing I want to show you because we're running out of time, and the library has a lot of functions for you to offer. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions on that. But the last thing I quickly want to show you is WS Proxy. Again, WS Proxy was introduced end of 2018, pre-pandemic, or way pre-pandemic. And it allows you to have a SOAP layer internally towards your Marketing Cloud. So instead of creating SOAP calls, if you're executing it onto your Marketing Cloud instance in a script activity, cloud page, SMS, email, whatever. Email you can't use WS Proxy in sending environments. But on a script activity or on a cloud page, you don't have to build a lot of SOAP calls, which is cumbersome to do. WS Proxy is basically the middle layer. There's great articles around WS Proxy, but it goes further in the library by doing very simple things for you. So, for example, let's create a data extension. And again, I'll just disable this. So if we go WS Proxy, we create an instance of WS Proxy, and then we say prox create data extension. We want to call it demo data extension. We want to give it these fields: text, field type text, so the name is text and the field type is text. The max length is 50, and the default value is hello world. And then optionally, I want to put it into a folder. So the folder ID is inside your data extensions. So if you don't know, you can use Email Studio to do this. But if you want to know the folder ID for this, you can just go into inspect and you find the folder ID as well in here. So you don't have to really search for it. But I want to create this data extension in here. So if I save this, and then it gives me a response of what has been created. So if I refresh this page now I'm able to get an OK back with a result, with an object information around the customer key, the retention periods, everything around this. And if I go into Contact Builder, you will see that there's no data extension. So that one thing. So very simple, very quickly, you can just create a data extension. You can build up mock-up. Let's say you use Package Manager normally to deploy things, but let's say you just want to do a standalone project where you also need to create data extension or delete data extensions you have created previously, or tear down, build and tear down things. You can easily do this with that. So let's go further after we're creating it. Let's just copy a data extension. Same thing, like you say, prox, copy data extension. You give the customer key, which you also could use a name. It doesn't need to be customer key. It also tries to find the unique customer key for it. You give a new name. You have the ability to copy it with data, with the records inside. Keep in mind, it's a batch of 2,500. And if you copy a data extension with 5 million records, you sometimes find yourself that this probably times out in your cloud page, because the cloud page only runs for, I think, maximum to 2 minutes before it times out. Most of the time, it just takes 45 seconds to a minute. But you can also put it into a script activity in the Automation Studio and run this as a script activity. And then you have, I think, 30 minutes before it starts timing out. Sometimes 30 minutes is not enough to copy 5 million records with this, because you have to iterate multiple times over it to get these records out. But for a smaller set of data, that's very simple to do. And you give off the target data extension. Again, how do you know all this? Well, if you use an environment like this and have it set up correctly, you will get all the information based on JS doc, but also on your documentation, you can see the same thing. ID, which explains the identifier for the data extension, name or customer key, the new name for the copy data extension, set to copy all records, the identifier in the folder. So if I execute this, and the data extension I want to copy is my demo journey, which is the AVE9. So if I refresh this page, now what it allows me, it gives me back true, meaning, okay, my data extension has been copied. I refresh it. You can see now I have demo journey 2 with 2 records in it, which should be my Sascha and Sascha 2. Was very quick. Again, 2 records, not a problem. Even 10,000 records is not a problem, or 20,000. If you go over 100,000, that becomes then a bit slow, and I would change Automation Studio, but that's just the nature of data processing in Salesforce, not part of the library. The last thing I want to showcase is, what if you run an automation and you want to run this automation in a staged way? So you run an automation which runs for 10 hours, and within the 10 hours, you want to run 5 different automations. You can build a script activity to fire off another automation. Pretty simple to do, but again, you would copy a lot of code, and then you find yourself debugging a lot. Here with the library, you simply just say prox, UWS proxy, prox triggered automation, and again, customer key or name. And if I go to Automation Studio, you find my automation here. You see it's not running at all right now. And it's actually loading. Maybe it's timed out. Just refreshing this. But I can save this now and then refresh the page in a second. Cool. So if I refresh the page now, it will tell me, okay, there's an error. Great. Needs to be activated, can't be paused. Okay, so it did work for a couple of seconds. I would need to debug. We're running out of time. I can't really debug, but normally it's very simple as exactly this. I could create a new automation, do the same thing, and do this. Probably this, I would just remove the schedule because it shouldn't have a schedule. Let's try this quickly because you can't schedule scheduled automations. So let's do this one more time. True. Okay, cool. That was the issue. So now the automation starts running. It's just an issue that you can't, if you have a schedule, even if it's paused or active, you can't trigger it via an API call, via WS Proxy. I know I rushed through a lot of things very quickly to a lot of code. I have this YouTube channel where I go more into detail into several different parts, but I'm now willing and happy to answer any questions. So I will open up the chat to just go quickly through it. Again, thanks for joining in.
We don't have any questions specific to the demo in the chat, but maybe, oh, there's the first one. So go ahead and yeah.
So when the SSJS Lib new version is published, or when a new function is added, will they get updated to the already existing SSJS version in the Salesforce Marketing instance? If not, is there a way to update them? So the new version, I create a new version of the library or new functions, you have the version numbers here, which will incrementally go up. So the idea of that is I cannot guarantee 100% backwards compatibility all the time. So if you want to use it, it's just a matter of what you actually loading. So if you have already SSJS library installed with a version 1.01 and you install the new version, that does not interfere with the current project as you have. You just have a new set of content builder blocks, which you can then use in other projects. If you are 100% certain that you don't want to use the 101 anymore, and there's no problem because you only had one project, or you're completely aware of what has been coded, you're more than easy to change just basically this file. It's depending on what the file is loading. So the SSJS library here itself, just use something like this for loading each individual wizard version, and you can easily adjust this at any stage. What is the difference between triggering journey by SSJS versus by DE after from filled of a landing page? So you may, okay, so what is the difference between triggering a journey by SSJS versus DE after form filled out by a landing page? You mean what's called the smart forms? So smart forms, or the triggered forms, what is it like? I can't really get the head of the names here.
Is it smart capture forms?
Smart capture, yeah, that's the one. It's not much different. So if you're looking at journeys itself, it's not faster. But if you look at journey, it doesn't matter which one you're looking at. Smart capture, if you're looking at the connector from Salesforce, anywhere like this, it all uses exactly the same endpoint. It kind of uses the API endpoint to do the same thing over and over again. So if you're looking at how your float in SFDC is triggering a journey in Marketing Cloud with the connector, you can find in your Marketing Cloud all the data extensions similar to this data extension here, which holds the journey entry as well, the same way. So it's not fast or slower. It's just a different way to do it. But I personally don't like smart capture because you can't do data manipulation really well. though I would rather build my own cloud page to do the data manipulation. Is there no necessity of encryption of the auth token? Is it not a security issue? So no, the auth token itself from Salesforce, you can encrypt it if you want to, but it's a public available, well, like not public available, but it's an available base 64 encoded string anyway. So if you look at it, what the token is, it's valid for 20 minutes first. It's a JWT, which should last less than 20 minutes. And the payload is a token ID, which then reflects to a session ID on Salesforce. And the way how JWT works is you should not be able to manipulate the payload of this or the entire JWT, because then the signature doesn't work anymore. The signature of this JWT is encrypted, and that's encrypted in Marketing Cloud. And there's the same way as it encrypted if you use it on the new JWT from Mscript. It's encrypted with an encryption function. Most of the time it's RSA and something like that, or SSJS at least, with HMAC. Do DE loggers from different cloud pages log to one DE or to different ones? Well, the logger can log to, right now, the logger does one data extension, but you can define in the logger itself which data extension. So there's an additional parameter which you can add as a target. So you can define a different data extension instead of the Marketing Cloud, the SSJS Library default ones. How are the API calls authenticate using various predefined functions? So the authentication of the API calls, I'm assuming you mean the REST API, not the SOAP from WS Proxy. The REST API uses a token generation similar as what you find everywhere else. It's just that it all built up for you already. So it's creating the token, saving the token for 20 minutes, and then request a new token if it need to be before it's expiring. And the credentials for this all is set up into a setting. And if you go into the settings part, which is part of the installation process. So if you go to the settings, you have a few things in here, and you have the credentials in here. So the credentials basically tell you this is a login here, but it's encrypted. So this is encrypted. So your credentials are nowhere to be found into your code. And that's another benefit of it. So another benefit is that if you're using a project and you're exporting it to the GitHub, your credentials sometimes see it in clear text in your code, and they were just being exposed. This is an encrypted string with the cipher function from Marketing Cloud. So it's not being exposed anywhere. Where can I find the recording of the session? I mean, that's part.
Yeah, I will post it to YouTube later, and I will also post the link on the sign up page that you have used to sign up for this meeting. So you will be able to access it through Trailblazer community as well.
Cool. The other one is using WS Proxy to bring down the automation speed. No, the way that it's no way to really reduce the automation. There's two ways of doing this. One is a very fancy one. You can run this automation every hour. And then you basically, at the end, you just trigger another automation, which triggers then the same automation again. And then you can basically bring it down to the maximum run speed of the automation. You have to trigger another automation, unfortunately, because if you can't trigger the same automation from itself when it's still running, because then it says it's still running. The other way you can do it is if you have an automation, which let's say runs a SQL, and the SQL needs to run every 10 minutes, you can just run a SQL and then put 6 wait times each 10 minutes in there. And then you run it every 10 minutes for 6 times before the automation restarts over again at the end. So that is also another trick. But no, you can't just simply reduce the timer to from 1 hour to something else. You can just do a couple of tricks. Can we do an update on external database via API? Oh yeah, sure you can. Update on an external database via API. That's basically with a HTTP request. So depending on how you want to do the update, it comes into maybe file extractions where you want to export data. If you want to trigger an external API, you can use this easily with the HTTP request. Hi, Flo, enjoyed late. How the code file which you were updating in the VS Code linked? Okay, so the setup for that is just for this demo purposes. I would not recommend it to do this on a live environment. and every company has its own policy. But right now I'm using just a simple Dropbox account where I just linked this cloud page with a treat as content. But you can also use something more sophisticated. So in the core, for example, you have something like GitHub. So you can use a secure GitHub account. So if you're coding, I would recommend to use, if you're coding for someone, I would recommend to upload it to GitHub, but make it a private GitHub. And then you can use this function to actually get GitHub repo content with a token. You need to create a token, an access token, and so on. So there's also downside of that. And I'm working through a solution which would probably solve a lot of these headaches. But depending on your company, that's different ways to do this. And then the last one, is there any function available related to SFTP in this library? No, not yet. There's a exporter to the extraction, but that's how far I went with this. I didn't put anything to SFTP at this stage. But if you have a use case, and that's what I encourage everyone before we're closing it off, I encourage you, everyone, if you have ideas, if you have something you want to share, if you have a code snippet you reuse, you can't find in the library and you find it good, by all means, either way, send it me directly or send it as a change request into GitHub, and I'm more than happy to take this on and put it into the library. This library it's for everyone. It's for everyone to use. The idea is to help you guys speeding up development processes, making less complicated code constructs in your project, reduce errors, and in general have a better coding standards. Like especially the part around credentials exposure in code is, I've seen so many shocking things around that, where these things are being on a public GitHub, and you can just simply get the credentials of any API, and you think, okay, that's great. That shouldn't be like this. And it's a customer from someone, and they're like, wow, okay, they probably don't know. There's a PII leak, and that can cause massive damage. So these type of things I've seen way too often, and I think the library addresses these really nicely. I'll leave you 2 minutes with this. Sorry for that, but if you want to, I stop sharing my screen, and then
yeah. Thank you, Sascha. Thank you for this presentation. It was really amazing. And now let me just quickly share my screen for the last announcement today. So here are the winners of the certification voucher lottery. Congratulations to Sunny, Meda, Kamil, Mani, Emil, and Oresti. I hope I got everyone's names right. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Sascha, for presenting. With regards to the winners of the lottery, I will pass your details directly to Salesforce, and you will all get an email directly from someone from Salesforce with the certification voucher. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope to see you next month during the next community meeting. Thanks and bye-bye.
Thank you.